Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Then next, please, the slide. Thank you. So hi, everyone, and welcome to the Learning and Sharing Café on the occasion of the World Breastfeeding Week. Just to remind you, this webinar is being recorded. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. And if you have any questions, also please use the Q&A box. So today's webinar tackles shared responsibilities for infant and young child feeding in emergencies, and will include main contributions from Save the Children, UNHCR, ACF, and the MAMI Global Network. This webinar has been organized jointly between the IFE Core Group and the Global Nutrition Cluster Technical Alliance. Next, please. So the working group within the IFE Core Group, members of the IFE Core Group Webinar Working Group have been working hard on implementing and facilitating these webinars. And you can see here the members of the IFE Core Group Webinar Working Group, as well as the supporting donors on this slide. Next, please. The objectives of the Sharing and Learning Café, of course, is to create a space for us to share and learn about infant and young child feeding in emergencies. For this particular webinar and today, we're really focusing on multi-sector programming, and therefore the objectives are to raise awareness on multi-sector programming, responding to the needs of infants under 2, their mothers and care providers, share lessons learned and best practices on IYCF-E multi-sector programming, and provide country-level examples. And of course, galvanize actors, all of us, to implement evidence-based, effective IYCF-E multi-sector programs. Next, please. So the agenda for today, we will start off with this brief introduction. Then we will have also a small introduction to the World Breastfeeding Week. We will then have a small activity with you all. So I'd like to ask you please to keep your laptops or computers ready, as we will share a link with you. Then after that activity, we'll start with a series of presentations on the IYCF-E framework, an opportunity to apply this shared responsibility, and then case studies from different countries, and then a panel discussion, Q&A, and then closing. Next, please. The speakers for today will include Deborah Joy Wilson from WFP, Sarah Butler O'Flynn from Save the Children, Isaac Kabasi from UNHCR Uganda, Millicent Kabusa Lusiji from UNHCR Ethiopia, Kelsey Gray from the MAMI Global Network, ENN, Armel Sachet from ACF, and myself, I'm the IFE Core Group Facilitator with ENN. Next, please. And I think now, without further ado, we can start with the agenda, and I'll hand over to Deborah, hoping that your connection is better, Deborah, to give us a small introduction on the World Breastfeeding Week. And over to you, Deborah.
Yeah, greetings everyone, and apologies, my connection's very weak, so let's hope we get through it. So I'm just doing a brief introduction on World Breastfeeding Week, which is a global campaign that happens annually from the 1st to the 7th of August every year. And we're kind of extending that out because some countries and some organisations actually make the month of August also devoted to breastfeeding. So the reason behind World Breastfeeding Week is to raise awareness of the importance of breastfeeding to the survival, health and well-being of all, and it's to galvanise action to protect, promote and support breastfeeding globally. This year's World Breastfeeding Week theme is Protect Breastfeeding, a Shared Responsibility, and you may have been, participating in some of the great webinars that happened last week. Increasingly important is the fact that we're moving near the World Health Assembly target year of 2030, and the target for breastfeeding was increase the rate of exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months up to 70% from the baseline year of 2012. But globally, the world's not on track to reach those targets. So Exclusive breastfeeding is globally about 44% in 2019, which has gone up, from 37% in 2012. But the current rate of progress is insufficient, and the multitude of effects of the COVID-19 pandemic have further impacted on the optimal breastfeeding practices. So the optimal breastfeeding practices, protection, promotion, and support of early initiation of breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth, exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months, continued breastfeeding up to 2 years or beyond, with the safe and adequate introduction of complementary feeding. And that should be the centre point of any public health strategy and policy on infant and young child feeding. And this requires a multifaceted approach. In emergency contexts, it's particularly important an integrated multi-sectoral approach is implemented to protect breastfeeding and to facilitate optimal breastfeeding practices. And this is presented in the with the guidance in the IFE core group operational guidance. Associated with this in emergency context, the shared responsibility becomes even more important, and therefore today we're very excited to share important tools and a framework that will help us to introduce a multi-sectoral approach. Now we're going to move on to do a participatory activity. If you'd like to go on your search engines to www.menti.com and put in the code 45239381. Now this is in your chat, so if you copy that over, www.menti.com and enter the code 45239381. That's great. Now, within that, you will have been asked a question. Share one key activity for integrating maternal and child nutrition into different sectors. Now, there are a variety of sectors, and the diagram there shows you some. So if you'd like to think of different activities, maybe it's messaging, maybe it's coordination, maybe it's policy, many different ways in which an activity can be conducted that integrates maternal and child nutrition into different sectors. Fantastic, yes, joint needs assessment, coordination, referral pathways, ensuring pre and postnatal counselling, cross-training and cross-supervision. Excellent. Communication, yeah, different communication strategies, whether it be counselling, messaging within a broader social behaviour change communication. MUAC screening at food distribution site, excellent. Policies, sensitization, yes, joint targeting. Caregiver coaching, excellent, that's great. Gosh, this is great. We're getting lots of different activities that can be done. Advocacy, joint action plans, joint tools like nutrition counselling cards, ones that include WASH within those. Home visits where volunteers engage the components of each sector. That might be early child development or WASH or other areas. Advocacy, baby-friendly spaces, absolutely different components of different sectors to be integrated into baby-friendly spaces. The importance of maternal lactation for counselling for mothers. Excellent. Getting a few of the others, yeah, the IYCF corners and non-nutrition sector sites. So that's really great to reposition where the IFE corners, IYCF-E corners are. Yes, recognising breastfeeding and breast milk as food security. And yeah, we saw that some of the Food Systems Summit, we would have liked that better highlighted. Stakeholder engagement, working with donors to ensure that there's cross multi-sectoral activities integrated. Health, of course, yeah, integrated into the health system approach, whether it's at facility level or community level. I'm sorry, one here is in Spanish or Portuguese, and I can't quite read it. Someone may be able to provide guidance in the chat box for that one. Maternal nutrition, absolutely, and especially in the, last month of pregnancy, to be really giving those key messages on early initiation of exclusive breastfeeding, and the maternal nutrition for the breastfeeding woman herself, the mother herself. Caregiver coaching, early child development spaces in the IYCF corner, and ensure proper counselling with that. That's excellent. Fantastic. Now, I think we're getting some of the repeats coming through now. So, assessment, yeah, rapid assessments or in-depth multi-sectoral assessments on the infant feeding situation. Yes, improving wash and health facilities, that's great. And the wash facilities within baby-friendly spaces or infant and young child spaces as well. Focus on building key competencies that can be done both in trainings and on the job, supportive supervision.
Deborah,
yeah,
can you please wrap up? I think we have enough.
Excellent, fantastic, thank you. So thank you, that was fantastic input. And now I'll move on and introduce you to Sarah Butler O'Flynn, who's the Director of Emergency Nutrition Department, Global Health at Save the Children. Thanks, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Yes, so my name is Sarah O'Flynn. I direct the Emergency Nutrition team at Save the Children, and I've had the opportunity to be part of this partnership between UNHCR and Save the Children since it first began. I know that a lot of folks who are on this call have been part of the IYCF framework. I see Caroline Wilkinson, I see Nikki Connell. So it's exciting for us to think back to when the IYCF framework was still just an idea, that we were all thinking through how to create an IYCF friendly environment, how we could support that work. And now today we're going to be hearing from so many individuals who have really been a part of creating that action and leading that action for mothers directly. So it's a wonderful opportunity to be here today. Thank you. Just as we start, we can go to the next slide. I wanted to first just give an overview of the IYCF framework. This is a guidance to really support program managers and technical advisors, technical coordinators across all sectors with ideas for how to create an IYCF friendly environment that really supports optimal IYCF and supports a mother and care providers to adopt optimal infant young child feeding practices and support their care of their children and their families. Rather than explaining it myself, I will hand over to an orientation video that we use within our programming and within the rollout of the IYCF framework. This video has served to, we can go on to the next slide to prepare. This video is really part of the initial rollout when we work with colleagues in country and operations. So if we go to the next slide, we can show that video. It's about 4 minutes. And as you watch it, I hope that you'll consider this World Breastfeeding Week theme of shared responsibilities and how the video might highlight different ways that, that actors and individuals are engaging in this work. Thank you.
Sarah and her baby have just arrived in a refugee camp. She doesn't know where to begin. She is afraid. She knows that her baby is vulnerable to malnutrition, illness, even death. Where will she find shelter, food, clean water? medical help. Helping Sarah and her baby involves all of you, across sectors, senior managers and those on the ground, working together to ensure their health and safety by advocating, coordinating, capacity building, evaluating and learning. But how? UNHCR and Save the Children have produced a framework for action to help parents like Sarah, the Infant and Young Child Feeding Framework. Follow Sarah's journey to see how different sectors can contribute to an IYCF-friendly environment. Upon arrival at the refugee camp, the shelter team guides Sarah and other breastfeeding and pregnant mothers to shelters nearest the health facility. Once settled, the Food Security and Livelihood team guides her to food distribution points where she is prioritised in the queue. The team will ensure a shady breastfeeding space for Sarah. Now back at her shelter, the Water, Sanitation and Hygiene team pays Sarah a visit to demonstrate proper hand washing and safe disposal of child feces. When Sarah is ready to socialise with other mothers, the Child Protection team will guide her to a baby-friendly space, run alongside a child-friendly space where she will find support. The health team is there to vaccinate the baby and support Sarah with IYCF practices. She is concerned about her baby starting solid foods in a few months, so they refer her to the nutrition team for follow-up. Advice from the nutrition team about how to start solid food from 6 months of age is given. A cooking demonstration alleviates Sarah's concerns. Behind the scenes, the camp management team ensures donations of breast milk substitutes are not accepted and immediately confiscated as distribution to the population is unsafe. Now that her immediate needs are met, Sarah has time to attend adult learning sessions. The education team offers various session times and locations so Sarah can attend when convenient, while continuing to breastfeed. Sarah and her baby count on you, working together across sectors using the IYCF framework to help Sarah keep her baby healthy and be strong and confident to care for her family.
Great, thanks for that, Ben. Yes, Linda is just posting the link to that video and other resources that we have. This is the individual link to the resource, and we will be providing a link to the overall collection of IYCF Framework resources later on in the presentation. But following that video, we can move on to the next slide. I did briefly just want to highlight some of the ways that the IYCF Framework underscores this sense of shared responsibility and partnership. You'll see at the center of this infographic or the logo that describes the IYCF framework that the mother-infant dyad is really at the center of the work and helps to ground us in our thinking and our work across sectors and across the actions that need to be taken. And that's one of the first ways that we really work through the sense of shared responsibility, that all of the actions of the IYCF framework are locally defined and locally led. These are by data from the SENS surveys that UNHCR manages, or through programming data, or through conversations with mothers and with care providers. The actions are identified, the activities identified by those who are working with mothers themselves, and can share the information through coordination and through other means to really be clear on what are the enablers and the barriers for mothers in that particular context. The second way is through this partnership. The IYCF framework is a UNHCR and Save the Children global partnership, but on the field, it's really a partnership across UNHCR and the implementing partners in that particular context, as well as government counterparts. And finally, and probably what is of most interest in this particular presentation, is the shared responsibility across sectors, and we'll speak about that quite a lot. In the video, you've seen a few examples. You'll continue to hear more examples across sectors on how individuals and how how particular operations and particular locations identified what they could be doing across sectors to really make a difference and support mothers in supporting their families. You can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in 2014, we started just thinking about how we could support teams to create this IYCF-friendly environment. We piloted in 2015 in Kenya, Bangladesh, and Jordan, had some really good learning out of that went back into amending the framework. We then started a really significant rollout in East Africa, supported by the teams there. In particular, I see Nasser is on the call, by the regional office of UNHCR. In 2017, we did have the chance to roll out the framework in the first phase of the Cox's Bazar response, which gave us, again, a lot of learning. And now this year, after 2020, of course, was focused on COVID adaptations, and we produced a briefer to support field teams that captured the examples of those who were implementing the framework. And in 2021, we're excited to be rolling out in West and Central Africa with a focus on Niger and Chad. So I will stop talking here. One final thought is just that in terms of the multi-sector approach of the framework, we do approach this as a win-win. We try to identify ways that all the sectors can find activities that will work for their objectives and the outcomes that they're seeking. And the very first step is to really identify what those shared objectives and outcomes are that we can work together on. So often sectors will be focused on very similar target groups, pregnant and breastfeeding women and children under 2. So oftentimes there are ways that we can work together well and find those efficiencies for mothers, help to reduce the opportunity cost, help to support her in various ways. So I'll stop here. We'll now move into examples of what this has meant on the ground. We'll start with a video. It's about 8 minutes long, as it does highlight the work in Cox's Bazar. I see a lot of colleagues from Bangladesh joining in, as well as from Geneva, Ethiopia. And then we'll move into the 2 highlights with Isaac and Millicent that will give us more in-depth information from Uganda and Ethiopia. So we can go to the next slide and show the video if you don't mind.
Infant and young child feeding is a framework that looks at breastfeeding and complementary feeding support for children who are less than 2 years, but the framework overarches multi-sector collaboration and the contribution to the well-being of pregnant lactating women and children less than 2 years through their 1,000 days of life.
IYCF practices are vital for the well-being of our refugees, especially the mothers who are breastfeeding and those who take care of the young ones.
During inception, there was a launch, and after that, there were in-house trainings of all sectors and units, and then implementation took place at a camp level. We have thematic meetings. These are all for related themes: wash, health, nutrition talk together, environment, protection, and other groups also talk to each other. That's a forum to see where sector-friendly themes can be developed further.
Initially, the wash sector would just see themselves as just there to provide water supply, sanitation and hygiene, but not following up to see the actual impact. So with this framework, or coming together, having an intersector group, which wasn't there initially, it has helped the wash partners, the WASH sector to actually see the impact of the work we do.
Before the launch of the infant and young child feeding, we had missed out opportunities in the vaccinations. But with this particular program, then the baby-friendly spaces offers the opportunity where we have all children being given that priority to go through the immunization processes.
It's important because the entire well-being of the child and the mother is affected by so many other aspects beyond things like food. Shelter is a very important aspect. Access to clean water is a very important aspect of the well-being of the refugee. And all the other sectors like child protection have a role to play. Education, health, all these are integrated when we're taking care of the child.
Integration of infant and young child feeding for vulnerable populations, pregnant, lactating women and children under 2 years, saves lives.
So in terms of rolling out of the framework, Cox's Bazar is a bit complex because we have quite a number of sectors and we are still in the emergency period. How the framework helps us in Cox's Bazar basically is to look at how we involve all the other partners, for example, camp management, in addressing the issues.
Yes, we have in our health post, also we have a dedicated trained person on IYCF.
Last year we have trained traditional birth attendants from health sector. So we trained them on IYCF component to ensure actually the early initiation of breastfeeding.
Based on the 2017 rollout, at least we have some positive practices that are going on. For example, in most of the food distribution centers, we have at least breastfeeding corners, and also mothers are prioritized to access food. In at least most of the health facilities as well as nutrition centers, we have the breastfeeding corners, which was one key recommendation from the IYCF-E framework when it was developed.
হাসপাতাল জ্বালিয়ে হেরিমা আলাদা রুম আছে ফোনধরে হেরিমা দুধ দিবারে এড়াইলিও আলাদা রুম আছে তারা হাসে আরা ন জানি তারা তো ফুসালই ফোন ফোনধরে দুধ খাবার জন্য এই আলাদা রুম আছে ইহানো যে আর দুধ খাবার ইহানো অসুবিধা না
IYCF সাধারণত ফুড সিকিউরিটি, হেলথ, ওয়াশ এই ধরনের কিছু প্রোগ্রামের সাথে ইন্টিগ্রেটেড আছে। ফুড সিকিউরিটির সাথে যখন ইন্টিগ্রেটেড হওয়ার কারণে আমাদের কাউন্সিলিংয়ের জন্য আসা মা এবং দুগ্ধদান মায়ের সংখ্যা অনেক বেড়ে গেছে। ওয়াশের সাথে ইন্টিগ্রেট হওয়ার কারণে তাদের হাইজিন সম্পর্কে আমরা অ্যাওয়ার করতে পারতেছি হিউজ অ্যামাউন্টে।
So we are hoping that with the involvement of other sectors, we should be in a position to achieve the role and the goal of the framework, to ensure that at least all the issues that are key in terms of developing synergies and ensuring malnutrition is addressed across all the sectors.
IYCF is very important. What I see as a key part is that it brings all the sectors together, and it enables the sectors to see their contribution, so that someone in WASH does not just look at WASH as just providing water and sanitation, but goes down to see the real impact of the service to the household and to the child, whom if we do not address their needs at that level, when they're still very young, it would definitely affect their well-being.
Great, thank you for that. I hope that you are as excited to see those examples as I am every time I see the video. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Isaac Kabazi. Isaac is the Associate Nutrition and Food Security Officer with UNHCR Uganda, and he'll be able to share us a bit more information on his experience of implementing the IYCF framework in Uganda. You could switch to the next slide. I think that's Isaac's start.
Thank you so much, Sarah. My name is Isaac Kabazi, the Associate Nutrition and Food Security Officer. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Yes, so in terms of the framework launch in Uganda, it was launched in one general region, that is the Western region, where we have Bidibidi, Rhino, Kap, and Alabek in two phases, 2017 and 19. And the choice of the region is generally linked to the high vulnerabilities in this area, economic vulnerability and food security vulnerability, and generally even the fact that the indicators don't do so well as compared to the other areas of the settlements. But I'll largely talk about the environment itself, that Uganda is such an enabler because of the coordination structure within Uganda, where organically all the different sectors convene, and there is a lot of joint actions. So,
Isaac, it seems that your connection might be dropping a little bit. Would you want to turn your video off? Maybe we will have better opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So yes, in terms of the performance of the different IYCF indicators, they've generally performed well over time. When we look at, for example, early initiation of breastfeeding within an hour, when you look at bottle feeding, when you look at initiation of complementary foods with 6 to 8 months, these have generally done well. However, when you look at consumption of iron-rich foods, this has been on the decline for a long time because it's not only linked to behavior change in optimal feeding, but it's also linked to the livelihoods where the refugees or the persons of concern actually have to have the economic access to diversified diets. So as much as we do in part strengthen the ability to make the right choices, but then if they don't have enough in terms of what they can put on the plate, then it becomes a bit of a problem. Then also explosive breastfeeding, I think that's an area that you generally need to strengthen because it has also been on the drop. And that's both refugee and the national. Over to the next slide. Sarah? Yes, so in terms of the mainstream within the different sectors, there is a general shift within UNHCR towards prioritization of prevention. And this has also attracted investment within IYCF, given that this is a preventive arm within nutrition. So we've seen an increase in investment in areas like creation of mother-baby friendly spaces, and prioritization of care groups. Currently in the operation, we have about 435 care groups across the 13 refugee settlements. Then also prioritization of the role of the fathers, the super fathers. And given that this is the main vehicle for community engagement. So that has at least helped us. But then with funding within this region, we've been able to develop different IEC materials, translated them in the different refugee languages, and we've been able to disseminate them. Over to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, in terms of targeting prioritization, certainly looking at children below 2 years and the pregnant women, these are highly prioritized across different services that are offered. We have a bit of social protection programs within the refugee settlement where we link especially these groups because they're regarded the most vulnerable to social protection, livelihood programs. It could be nutrition sensitive food systems where they grow foods in the backyard. So these are the groups that come number one before we have to engage other groups. Then, of course, during our nutrition surveys, we again look at these different indicators and try as much as we can to track them and track performance. Over to the next slide. So around food security, IYCF multi-sector framework for integration has enabled the building of the SOPs around the food assistance collection. So this is something worked on in 2018, and certainly we had to ensure that within the food assistance collection space, there is prioritization, say, of PLWs, and also highlighting the role of protection. So today, at some final distribution points, the FDPs, we see that there has been investment in construction of MBAs or sheds. There is queues for the mothers that are prioritized when they come for food assistance collection. Then there is, of course, mainstream of messages during the collection of refugees. So pre-recorded messages, these have become standard practice at the final distribution point. That's one. But then also the role of protection. So protection has a very key role in food assistance collection in terms of identification of minors. So identification of minors and other vulnerable people. And this framework came in handy because then we're able to give protection the right tools to be able, first of all, to identify, but then to also make the right referral pathways, which end up either in nutrition and health partners or even community protection. We do have a UNHCR FAO planned collaboration, especially around energy efficient cooking. And within the targeting and prioritization, we're looking at caregivers, because then PLWs are the ones that provide majority of the care practices for children. So on our side, that has been the target group we've looked at in terms of pushing for energy efficient cooking. Over to the next slide. So protection, UNHCR being a protection agency, certainly child protection has a very, very key role. But often I think before the framework came in, we sort of once in a while used to have a clash between health and nutrition and protection, where protection also led a bit of efforts, especially in identifying and of children without a prospect of breastfeeding and actually providing the breast milk substitutes. So in a way, they were not following the code correctly, the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. So this is now where we came in as nutrition and health partners, and we had a discussion and we agreed on one identification to the referral pathway. So today, within the refugee response in Uganda, there is a good harmony, a working relationship between health and nutrition and protection, where they're actually able to go there in the field and identify, but then use the right referral pathways. Yes, but then the other thing is that we as in health and nutrition leverage off the resources in protection, because protection obviously is responsible in a way of creating this enabling environment for children. So suddenly where we're limited in funding, protection is able to go and invest in some of these. For example, having ECDs at reception centers, transit centers, and having all these different spaces. So we do have a very good collaboration in terms of pushing the messaging within the protection framework. Over to the next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so WASH education, this is again largely linked to pushing some of the messages around hand washing, around safe water, around optimal wash practices within the framework of IYCF. So, skilling or at least empowering our WASH officers or community health promoters that work with VHTs and pushing some of this messaging within the community. This has come in handy, obviously, in the current context where we're also dealing with COVID-19, where hand washing has to be highly emphasized. But then this has also attracted investment again within WASH, procurement of some of this equipment that is required at the household level. Over to the next slide. Yes, so in terms of the advocacy, I originally talked about the enabling environment within the Uganda refugee response, and we're thankful for that. The government of Uganda has created that space. But then to also mention that this framework has been possible because of the different actors coming together. The UN partners, the partners that work with IPOP, the refugees themselves, because we do work with the refugee leadership, especially in the settlements where there could be a violation of some of these codes, and working with the refugee chairman, working with the Office of the Prime Minister to actually support us in in purging some of these bad practices. So that has really been a collective effort. But then also at the national level, we've been able to work on support to the field in terms of areas around policy. For example, how do we implement IYCF in the context of COVID-19 and the COVID of EVD? I mean, Uganda has faced these two epidemics in quick succession, and this has actually come in handy. A few hours ago today, Minister of Health with the different UN agencies, UNHCR, WFP, UNICEF, WHO, and partners actually launched the national strategy for maternal, infant, and young child and adolescent nutrition. So what this framework actually does is that we already have a bit of the skills, we have a bit of the understanding of how to integrate and push the priority actions within the different sectors. This new strategy is actually going to fall within a framework that exists, and our partners, the different stakeholders, are actually going to be able to champion and push how we prioritize the different optimal feeding practices. So I think for me, that's a very good thing that this new strategy is coming on a fertile ground where already a practice exists on how to push these different actions. I think that is generally the experience from Uganda. I've seen a number of comments that people gave earlier on, and we work on a number of things, but just because of the limitation of time, that's our experience I could share right now. Thank you so much, and over to you, Sarah.
Thank you for that, Isaac. It's always fantastic to see how different operations have identified and recognized these opportunities to work across sectors. And I appreciate that you brought up the importance of advocacy and coordination as well. There's going to be a time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. We do have a Q&A function as part of Zoom, so please pop in your questions there and we will be able to add them to the queue for the Q&A section. Without further ado, we can move to the next slide and welcome Millicent Lisingi into the presentation. She is the Food Security and Nutrition Officer for Ethiopia in Gambela. And Millicent, over to you. Millicent, you might be on mute. There you are.
So thank you, Sarah, and greetings to you all, and thank you for the opportunity to share what Ethiopia and Gambela has been able to do to advance the infant and young child feeding framework. So in Gambela refugee camps, the infant and young child feeding programs are part of program design, but the IYCF framework scale-up provided the opportunity for UNHCR and other stakeholders to engage with beneficiaries on a shared responsibility of protection, promotion, and support of pregnant lactating women, children under 2 at different service points and in the community. Next slide, please. This was made possible with active engagement and commitment support of the operational and implementing partners who as well receive funding from different donors. Next slide, please. So specifically, the key driver to the achievements in advancement of the infant and young child feeding framework across sectors is a collective responsibility through the multi-sector assessment, and specifically the UNHCR Standardized Expanded Nutrition Survey that follows the annual that looks at the causal framework of malnutrition, and the findings enabled undertaking of the nutritional causal analysis assessment that provided additional information in the development of care pathways and having evidence-based programs like the electronic cash-based intervention programs that target households with pregnant lactating women, children under 2, and the ongoing toddler care groups that look at complementary feeding in support groups within the community. Next slide, please. So this has had a contribution to reduction of the global acute malnutrition levels in Gambela camps from 23.5 in 2017 to 10.4 in 2019. And we'll be able to see any additional impacts in the ongoing standardized expanded nutrition survey in 2021. We've also seen a steady increase in the exclusive breastfeeding rates in Gambela camps, an indication of optimal breastfeeding practices and adoption of best practices by the breastfeeding mothers. Next slide, please. So in terms of coordination, stakeholder engagements, and having IYCF partnership prioritized, in the previous video, we all saw that there is macro and micro coordination at different levels, where the camp management teams engage with sectors to look at issues, not just in nutrition, but livelihoods, protection. And with this, then this particular information has enabled addressing the child and the mother needs at camp level and as well as at household level. Next slide, please. At sectoral level, the intersectoral, multisectoral, and sectoral engagements to drive nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions have been key. Lots have been achieved across the years, but I'll focus on the community-based protection and community structures, which have been the greatest pillars to sustaining the actions in the IYCF framework. So at community level, we have community leaders who are called the refugee central committees and the community outreach agents who are an interface on services that are provided at community level and with service providers at facility level. At primary level, we have the mother-to-mother support groups, which is advancing Gambela camps where mothers come together and they're able to talk about breastfeeding and complementary feeding practices. And this, with this sharing, then they're able to change and adopt better behaviors. With that, then with the nutrition evaluations and care pathways, we have been able to as well provide additional key changes through the father-to-father support groups. Currently, we only have 26, but this will be champions who will be able to support the roles of the mothers, especially the workloads at household level in terms of improving IYCF practices. Gambela has also been privileged to learn a lot from the goal initiative of the MAMI, which has been cascaded across all the camps. Next slide, please. So with this then, we've had expansions to household food security through different modalities, cash-based interventions, but also looking at sustainable actions through improvements of livelihoods at household level. So this has been achieved with expansion to have a livelihood sector where refugees are now having access to farmlands, where they're able to produce a variety of food to meet different diet needs at household level, for as well as pregnant and lactating women. And these particular expansions were achieved through small beginner projects of the backyard gardening and group backyard gardening programs, which was spearheaded by mother-to-mother support groups and targeting pregnant lactating women and households with younger children. Next slide, please. So this has been made possible by UNHCR and its partners deliberately agreeing to have context-based workshop where IYCF framework has remained a viable strategy in advancing the networks and the importance of each sector in driving infant and young child feeding results. Next slide, please. So with this then, at camp management level, UNHCR was able to have collaborative actions with the shelter working group where all houses are addressed. Now this improves access, follow-up of service providers and beneficiaries in advancing the needs of a pregnant mother and lactating women at the micro levels and household levels within the refugee camps. So the camp officers lead the thematic meetings, and in this meeting, they continue to discuss issues that are of interest to pregnant and lactating women. Next slide, please. So this has been made possible by UNHCR in the country operational plan, the regional response plan, and the recent UNHCR multi-year, multi-pattern protection solution strategic plan by deliberately having infant and young child feeding indicators and actions which are key drivers to the infant and young child feeding framework. We have a donor, Lacasia Foundation, who is an earmarked donor for Ethiopia, and since the scale up of the IYCF framework has continued to provide funding to have innovative actions and to also continue to implement and advance activities in IYCF-E. Even at the reception center, we have the infant and young child feeding program being promoted. So thank you very much, and over to you, Sarah.
Yes, fantastic, Melissa. Thank you. I was getting lost in all your examples and imagining how they work on the field. So thank you very much to both you and Isaac for sharing those experiences. There have been a few questions coming through in the chat. We've been posting some of the videos that we've shown. Here is the website, and we'll be posting some of these links as well in the chat towards the end of the presentation. But all of the resources for the IYCF framework are available on the IYCF-E hub. There's a collection located there if you follow this link, and you'll be able to find the framework itself, 2-pagers for each sector, as well as a 2-page briefing document. In the last year, we did work on a COVID adaptations briefer as well, and you'll find all of the videos. These are all being translated into French. Some are already available or need to just have final touches on them, and we will post it there, continually updating this sort of knowledge hub for the framework. Before we move into the panel questions, I do want to flag one more opportunity to hear from the most important people in this whole initiative, as well as the focus of World Breastfeeding Week, of course. We wanted to show a video from highlighting the story and the experience of a mother in Gambella. And so in the next slide, we have that video. It's short, so only about 3 minutes, highlighting the experience of a mother. And so let's move over to that slide, please. And then we will bring back all of our panelists to ask a few questions.
ngi nga gat ke la te kwime gat ke lu kwime ba shak ba ngai ka kubai bi shak ka ngai ka kubai kan shak ba ko lo nya nyen ta sha ngi nga na mo we si ku mi kan ngi sha ta de le ke sha de ngai ku kan ka mi da la duel ngi ja duel pol poñ ma la yam siam la jeg feeding sen ka jega ring man pala ne titisen sinay wo bene feeding la jak ka bene ring man pala ka na bene jak ka bene sabu bene ka jak ka shak ka jak kam gar kana la shin lat ke sap ci lat ke hayam siap ku je youtube tin ba ma shi wo lo kan yi ta to diet ke feeding da kan ka kai karara la wa na dong kan la wa dong na kan ke sam yen la yen ku la lo ka diet ke feeding da kan
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope that that helps to center us once again on the experience of mothers in emergencies and refugee contexts and what they experience each day and ways that we as humanitarians can work with them. I think maybe the video is starting again. Yeah, so ways that we can all support them as humanitarians, whether that's as nutritionists or as non-nutritionists in other sectors. So many ways that we can be supporting to strengthen mothers, to do what we can to help her adopt these recommended practices. So without, I don't want to repeat myself, we're going to move now into the panel session. We have just a few questions for our panelists, and then we will be opening up to a Q&A. So we will be welcoming Isaac and Millicent back to answer a question about implementation of the IYCF framework. We will also be welcoming Kelsey Gray and Armel Sacher onto the panel as well. So first, let me start with a question for Millicent and Isaac. We talked a lot about multi-sector programming, and so I was curious your opinion and your experience, what you found to be the most critical enabler to multi-sector programming for children under 2 and their care providers. Maybe Isaac, as you went first, perhaps you could answer the question first.
Sorry, Sarah, come again. Is it the first question from Sophie?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's the question of if you could speak to a critical enabler that you've found in your experience to adopting multi-sector programming.
Sorry, come again. I didn't get you.
Yep. So if you can mention what you've found in your experience has been very helpful or a critical enabler to this multi-sector programming.
Yes, I think for us, it's generally the structure of the Uganda refugee response, where which is made very clear through the refugee response plan in Uganda, where the different sectors work together closely. I mean, it's well aligned, where health and nutrition has certain key actions linked to livelihood, which also linked to food assistance, and that environment alone has enabled us to have dialogue through the different ethnic working groups at the segment level, at the national level, and in a way we've been able to push for joint actions. For example, if at the settlement level there is actions that have been identified from nutrition and they are supposed to be implemented by WASH, then again through the intersector dialogues, we're able to pass on this information and WASH is able to pick them up immediately. So I think for us, the fact that the different sectors don't have so much conflict and are able to work seamlessly has made it much more enabling for us to mainstream the different key actions of IYCF into those respectful sectors. I think for us that is it. There is a number of other factors, but that environment alone, Sarah, has pushed us a bit of a mileage ahead. Over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Isaac. Millicent, are you able to turn on your video? But in any case, it's over to you for your thoughts on the critical enablers. You're on mute at the moment, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. For Ethiopia and Gambela, the critical changer is actually the multi-sector survey that UNHCR does every year following the standardized expanded nutrition, the standard expanded nutrition survey that has like 7 modules. So you have demography, anthropometry, anemia, infant and young child feeding, food security, mosquito bed nets, water sanitation and hygiene, and plus triangulation of regular data. So this information, just by having that survey, it involves management teams, it involves refugee leaders, it involves camp management teams, it involves program operations. And with that, all sectors are able to make changes based on the findings. I'll give an example of Gwenyel camp, one of the largest camps in Gambela with over 90,000 refugees. And the issues of the water systems featured in the findings of the report as one of the key issues around feeding practices and as well as gambling. So then the wash sector picked that up and they were able to set up the water systems to meet the minimum 15 liters per person per day. And just with that, we had high survival rates through reduction of gambling. Thank you.
Thank you, Millicent. These are 2 really good examples of what is helpful in multi-sector integration. I know there are a number of other questions that have come through, and we hope that we can highlight those in the Q&A. Also a good question from Caroline on what's been challenging to multi-sector integration as well. So we'll come back to those during the Q&A. Please continue to add those. I'd now like to welcome Kelsey Gray, if you wouldn't mind bringing on your video, to represent another intervention that's really highly engaged with multi-sector action, and that's the management of small and nutritionally at-risk infants and their mothers. And we heard Millicent talking about Goals Initiative in Ethiopia, so wanted to hear a bit more about that. So Kelsey, taking the example of the mother in the video, the mother from Gambela, can you describe how the Mammy Care Pathway would have facilitated a multi-sector approach to supporting her and her children?
Sure, thanks, Sarah, and hi, everyone. So as Sarah mentioned, so MAMI stands for the Management of Small and Nutritionally At-Risk Infants Under 6 months and Their Mothers, just in case there's anyone on here who isn't familiar with the initiative. And the MAMI Care Pathway is a set of resources and materials to support the screening, assessment, and holistic management of small and nutritionally at-risk infants under 6 months and their mothers. And I'll put some of the key links in the chat box after this. And the pathway was co-created by members of the MAMI Global Network, which is led by the Emergency Nutrition Network and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And one of its most important features is really that it aims to bridge interventions and links with and uses existing systems and services across sectors. So we know that nutrition problems are about more than feeding alone. That's really been highlighted throughout this webinar. So the MAMI Care Pathway connects nutrition, clinical, and social interventions to provide more holistic care for these at-risk infants and their mothers. So in the case of this mother and her triplets, I'll just give a few brief examples of how the MAMI Care Pathway could have been used to facilitate a multi-sectoral approach to her care. So first, just to highlight that antenatal services, if they were linked into the MAMI Care Pathway, could have flagged that her multiple pregnancy was a risk factor for having a small and nutritionally at-risk, infants, plural, and referred her for community-based MAMI follow-up and support after the birth to make sure that she continued to receive care after leaving postnatal services, because we know that there's often this sort of critical gap where those infants become vulnerable because they leave postnatal services, and then if they're lost to continued care, and say, for example, they have feeding challenges and they develop wasting or stunting, for example, and they don't become eligible for treatment programs until they're 6 months old. So we really want to be filling that gap and ensuring that they receive care during that period. So second, another thing is, so while infant feeding support is obviously core to MAMI, it isn't a standalone nutrition intervention. So it's really intended to link with the health sector to ensure that continuity of care. And to facilitate this, it's designed to embed within integrated management of childhood illness, or IMCI. And so it's formatted in that similar style. So really intended to come together and be integrated in health approaches and interventions. Third, it acts as sort of a framework or a hub to support referral linkages with other services that might be available in the area. So for example, if that mother was coming for routine follow-ups and having sort of her core MAMI items monitored, she might also be referred to ECD services or nutrition services for herself, for the mother, or social protection. So anything that's available in that area, just making sure that all those referrals are really linking up so that she has as much support as is available. And finally, sort of a key principle of the care pathway is that the mother and infant are considered together, because we know that infant well-being is closely linked with the well-being of the mother. So the assessment and follow-up throughout really includes elements of maternal mental health and maternal nutritional status, so that she can be prepared and able to best care for the infant. Of course, all of this will really depend on what the needs are in a given context, what already exists, and sort of what local resources are available. So we can't make those referrals if things aren't there, but really aiming to sort of maximize what is there and making sure that it all comes together in sort of a cohesive approach to make sure that that mother and infant pair, or infants, receive the best care possible. So just, important to note that, of course, the MAMI care pathway isn't intended sort of as an off-the-shelf intervention, and it will require adaptation to different contexts to really make it effective and relevant for different situations. So that's all for now. Thank you. And I'll put key links to the different materials in the chat. If you want to learn more about MAMI, please do get in touch or become a member of the MAMI Global Network. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, Kelsey. It's clear that there are some similarities here in which both the IYCF framework and MAMI really seek to identify what resources and strengths are already available in a context to respond to the needs for infants, young children, and their mothers. I would like to now switch over to Armel. Armel is the, let me get this right, Social and Behavior Change and Gender Transformation Senior Technical Advisor for ACF. And she is joining us to provide more of a deeper dive into one of the interventions that Isaac mentioned from Uganda, the care groups. And so the question that we have for Armel is to give us some insight into her experience of using care groups within multi-sector programs in Uganda, and what some of the advantages and disadvantages of that have been. Thanks, Armel.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry, my camera is not working, so I'll just keep it off. So I would say that in Uganda, we have been using care group in multi-sectorial approaches for a few years now. And we are also looking at how we can capitalize on this experience and see how what is the added value of it. So we are trying to compare how care group within nutrition only programming and within multi-sectoral programming can bring advantage or disadvantage or better result. Of course, Action Against Hunger, we do believe that multi-sectorial approach that has an added value, as it is highlighted in the framework. We think that of course we need to provide a response and to answer to the different needs of the people we serve. And WASH, FSL, protection, mental health, and PSS is also, and nutrition, of course, is part of what we provide in general. So I would say in Uganda, what was interesting is we are looking at how multi-sectorial programming can really enable better complementary feeding. So we are working on optimizing land for to improve complementary feeding and also diet diversity at household level. We're also working with saving group to see how we can improve resilience to shock of family and also increase access to better nutrition, better health, or better services. Definitively, we see that combining program like combining sector like FSL and IYCF and nutrition can improve complementary feeding, because when we work with the care group approach, so it's a care group is an approach that is community based, where you have mother leader or father leader who are working with their neighbor to support them and train them on different topics. So every month the father and mother leader receive a training, and then they will follow up with their neighbors. So it is very flexible in the sense that you can bring a lot of topics. So it's very easy to make it multi-sectorial, because you can make it a very effective platform to link with the other sector, depending on what other services are available within the ed system that is available, either by internally or with our partner as well. We can really help in creating synergy with what is existing around. On the other way, it's also we also need to be very careful, because we don't want to add on the burden of workload of the woman. So if we want the care group approach to be effective, we also need to take care of the time that we are taking when we are adding more topic for the caregiver, for the mother, and how we engage also family member and father in a way that will be supportive for them. And we also want to see how many topic can we realistically add within the curriculum, because if you spread in too many topics and behavior, then you don't have much intensity, so you are a bit less effective. So generally you want to have the right mix of SBC topics in a way that will make it both effective and also that it is also realistic for the caregiver. You are not trying to promote something that is not realistic in terms of behavior change. You really want to do a step-by-step approach. So this is in a nutshell what is our experience in Uganda, and I think that what has been also very interesting is combining, of course, care group with other type of media and behavior change strategy, like using radio or using other type of media, and mainly, I mean, with the COVID pandemic, of course, because we had to adjust. But I think that even in a normal setting, it's very useful to combine face-to-face and other type of SBC approach to promote IYCF and nutrition at a broader, let's say, more public level, broader audience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Armel. It sounds like it's really about the platform, and that the same advantages and disadvantages that impact so much of our multi-sector initiatives would be true for care groups as well. The need to be very conscious of that balance of finding efficiencies through utilizing existing actors and existing community mechanisms, that we can overload them as well. So this balance is very important to ensure success. We'll now be able to transition over into a Q&A, but before we do, I just wanted to extend my thanks to Millicent and to Isaac for their presentations, as well to Kelsey and Armel for joining the panel. And during the course of the presentation, I've had the chance to look at some of the participants who have joined us, and we have many individuals who have been involved in the IYCF framework at the very beginning in 2014, as well as currently. I see Mary from Cox's Bazar, who we all saw in the video. Terry from UNHCR headquarters is here as well. So just an appreciation of everybody's involvement in the framework over the last many years. So it's been fantastic to see how this has all come to a place where we are impacting the lives and supporting the decisions and behaviors of mothers in emergencies. That's all from me. I'll hand over to Linda for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Just a heads up, I have a bit of logistics technical problems, so but hopefully it has been resolved. I wanted to extend my thanks really to you, Sarah, for this opportunity. You know, when we started the call for proposals for the webinars, you know, the opportunity to highlight the IYCF framework for UNHCR for colleagues Millicent and Isaac and colleagues Kelsey and Armel. And I think we have a few questions that we can maybe join together. There are about 3 questions that I was hoping to maybe join together. One of them is about the barriers or challenges that are faced while implementing the IYCF framework, be it in general or also in terms of, I'm going to use the word convincing, you know, different sectors to be part of the IYCF framework. So my question is really about to Millicent and Isaac and you, Sarah, in terms of, you know, what are 2 challenges or 2 barriers that you might think of while implementing the IYCF framework?
Yeah, so Millicent here. What I would say is the major challenge in implementing the IYCF framework is the capacity and high staff turnover. In humanitarian settings, staff are like a moving target. So you build capacity, you have management buy-in, operational buy-in, and then there is the changeover of staff and you have to keep doing it. So for Ethiopia and in Gambela, it is an annual activity where we make the IYCF framework part of the context strategic planning, and we deliberately ensure that we include it in the project design with partners and coach those who are new in the programming. The second challenge would be related with intervening variables, and I will highlight here COVID-19. With COVID-19, then the plans to scale up like further support groups in camps was affected. But these mothers and communities within the camp continued to have smaller groups of mother-to-mother support groups, observing social distancing, but then the drawback of pandemics, calamities, and unexpected emergencies actually would definitely have a ripple effect to advancements in the IYCF framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Millicent. Isaac or Sarah, would you like to add anything on that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now one of the challenges is generally for the framework to work very well, especially you need to have a bit of agents across the different sectors, the ones we call champions. So certainly you need to constantly you know, take stock of what is happening in the other sectors. It could be someone in WASH, it could be someone in protection. Sometimes they could go away. Maybe, as Millicent said, high staff turnover. And if you don't put in the deliberate effort to know what is happening, or if they're following up on their specific actions, to them, it's not much of it's always going to be a secondary priority. You know, their first priority is going to be their own programs, for example, WASH or protection. So then there has to be this constant engagement. And again, probably that could also speak on some of the actions that we need to partake as moving forward in terms of implementation of the framework. That is one. But then 2, I think generally within we run sort of like an integrated system where we also support, partly support the host community because of the CRF in Uganda. This hasn't largely worked outside the refugee response. So that tends to be a challenge. And generally maybe it's sort of like a funding challenge. And maybe lastly is within the East Africa, Horn of Africa region, and these affect our programs. I mean, it filters down to you having funding to maybe maintain a mother baby area, or even the human resource involved. So as the funding is going down, then so is the nature of programming, and probably it requires us to kind of innovate around how to approach it much cheaply. For example, if you're looking at MBAs, can we think of a way that that is community based? Instead of looking at the facility, you look at care groups to implement the MBA structure. So those are some of the innovations we're thinking about amidst rising challenges of funding and all that. Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks. This is really interesting that you're also mentioning funding and innovation in the MBA, and because there are a couple of questions also that relate to strategies to address these challenges, to also engage with other sectors and bring them on board, but also funding. There's a question from Barbara about funding, and what about the future of multi-sector IYCF approach in the face of decreased funding. So could you speak on that? Sorry, Sarah, also I did not give you the opportunity. I'm just wary of the time. So I don't know if you want to take that question.
Should I go for it before Sarah comes in?
Yeah, sure. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
So now let me give an example of Uganda. Today in Uganda we launched the MyCan strategy. And certainly this is a government-led process where all of us fall into place to support. I have to mention that nutrition in Uganda is largely donor-funded. The government supports just a bit of HR and just a few things, even nutrition commodities, the government, donor-funded. And I think I saw a question from Sophie in terms of sustainability. Yeah. So one is that the government has released a costed work plan of implementing the MyCan strategy, in which all these different actions of IYCF fall. So with us being part of the Health Sector Integrated Refugee Response Plan, it means that over time, we include refugees into government planning. And it means that when government is allocating resources, they can be able to actually include refugees into the national budget. Now, that means that the development of the humanitarian community tends to now shed a bit of weight onto the government side. But then the other thing is that once this costed work plan and even the HRP are out, it means that it also gives an opportunity for other actors to invest. So it doesn't have to be UNHCR alone. It could be Save the Children, it could be ICRC, it could be anyone, it could be World Bank to invest in some of these things. Some of them are linked to infrastructure, for example, maintaining the mother baby areas. This has a bit of infrastructure implications. There is HR, where now the grants coming from the government that reward based on performance, and we can integrate some of the HR into that. So basically, it's like a cocktail of thinking around the funding and how we can shed some of the weight and moving into sustainability. Over to you.
Thank you, Isaac. Sarah, would you like to reflect on any of that, or Millicent?
Over to you.
I might just add that when the framework was first conceptualized, it wasn't meant to be something that would add cost to an operation. We very much recognized that there's not extra money in the system, let's say, and that for something to be achievable, it had to be very low resource intensive. And so the framework really is an umbrella to have conversations across sectors and to identify what are the actions that we need. And then underneath that umbrella are all of the programs that implementing partners and the UN and governments are engaging in. So the challenges that we face generally to fund programming is the same for the framework. But it was intended to be something that could potentially live on, even in situations where there isn't great funding for nutrition services, that a WASH actor or a health actor could identify what are those activities that could be taken up to support mothers and children of this age, so that there's just out of recognition of this funding constraint.
Thank you, Sarah. So I can maybe just ask Millicent if you have any additional input on the strategies and innovations before maybe I ask the last question and we close, just wary of the time.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I'll be very brief. In terms of innovation, I think it's the IYCF framework actually provides a platform to do a lot of research, a lot of innovations, and as the responders, it's important that we create that platform for our partners to be able to learn and to be able to come up with inspiring programs that add value to the framework. I'll give an example of the ongoing action against hunger, complementary feeding pilot to look at the FATVA, where then you're able
Did we lose Millicent or did we?
Able to make sure that the mother's practices, which is equally important for the age of 2 years. In terms to sustain the framework would be in terms of advocacy with governments when developing policy documents, guidelines to ensure that the multi-sectoral actions are included in this. So for Ethiopia, the government of Ethiopia has the food security and nutrition policy, which multi-sectoral action, and they've gone ahead to actually see technical forum where UN agencies actions within the refugee context.
You were breaking up a little bit, Millicent, and I think we lost you. But
okay,
I think
I actually completed. So
yeah.
Where did you lose me? Sorry.
No worries. And it continued, but pretty fast. So it's fine. This is really important. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just wary of the time. Maybe Ben, could you please share the last slide? Maybe close. So first, I'd like to thank you all first for attending this Sharing and Learning Café. We continue as IFE Core Group and GNCTA to hope to create a space for sharing and learning about IYCF-E, given the importance. And this World Breastfeeding Week is about sharing responsibilities. It's about getting the word out. It's about sharing the responsibility to support the mother. I remember a quote in one of the videos about the baby, the infant depending on the mother and the mother depending on us. And it's really up to us to share this responsibility as the World Breastfeeding Week highlights. And this IYCF framework is really a great example of how we can share this responsibility. And so I hope that we've whet your appetite to learn more about it and to try it. And of course, we're here to help with, testing it or even, there are the links that have been shared by Sarah and colleagues. So we hope that this is something that has benefited us all. I take the opportunity to remind you, please, to give us your opinion about this Sharing and Learning Café. The evaluation takes a very little time, so please do take a few minutes to give us your opinion. And I take also this opportunity to thank all my colleagues, front and back, in terms of colleagues who are answering questions, colleagues from the IFE Core Group webinar working group, GNCTA, for your continuous collaboration and support and dedication. And the last maybe slide, which I will put then please, this is also a reminder that we as a technical alliance, a global thematic working group, are here to provide support. And therefore, if you are looking for support, there are platforms that you can, there is a help desk, there's a link, there's a request support that you can use. So there's a link in front of you there. And also, if you're also looking for peer support, you can contact nnet.org. And with that, I wish you a great rest of the day wherever you are, and happy World Breastfeeding Week. Thank you all.